Kumar, who you've already heard from. Dr. Kumar is a professor of education at Mount St. Vincent University. For those of you that don't know, who don't know by now, Dr. Kumar developed the meditative inquiry approach that underpins this conference and the edited book it is centered on, as well as his teaching and research. He has conceptualized several key curricular and pedagogical concepts, namely curriculum as meditative inquiry, teaching as meditative inquiry, and music as meditative inquiry. He's also developed a contemplative research methodology called Dialogical Meditative Inquiry to conduct subjective and intersubjective qualitative research. This morning, he will be introducing meditative inquiry and the edited collection. Following his presentation, Dr. Garry Podolski, who created illustrations for the book, will be offering his reflections. Dr. Podolski describes himself as an artist, teacher, editor, author, poet, and pet lover. Dr. Podolski has presented his poetry, art, and curriculum theory at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia and McGill University, and is Director of Education and Audience Engagement at Quest Art School and Gallery. He was the illustrator for the book that is the focus of the conference, as I mentioned. The title for his talk today is Artmaking and Meditative Inquiry in the Spirit of Dialogical Collaboration. And now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kumar.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Let me screen share and make sure that the slides are working. So can you see them, Bonnie?
Yes, I can, yes.
Perfect. All right, everybody, welcome again to the Engaging with Meditative Inquiry in Teaching, Learning and Research Conference. There are basically two goals for my presentation. I would like to very briefly introduce you to the concept of meditative inquiry and discuss what I have been doing in this particular area, and also introduce you to the meditative inquiry collection on which this conference is based. So before we do that, as you remember from Bonnie's remark, we will try to have meditative sessions, short meditative sessions before each in the beginning of each panel, each session. So I would like to begin with a short meditation with you. So if it is possible, I would appreciate if you could close your eyes. If you can't close your eyes, you can look down on the floor and just try to sit very comfortably and bring your attention and intention to yourself. So take a moment, sit comfortably, and see if you can be still without controlling. So in this entire exercise, in this entire short meditation, I request that you don't try to control your thoughts or body and emotions in any way. If your body wants to move, don't control it. If your thoughts go anywhere, just let them go. And also for the emotions, whatever emotions you're experiencing, just let them be there, just acknowledge them. So I hope you are sitting in a still state. You are allowing your body to be still, to be grounded. And then just pay attention to any parts of the body that might be calling your attention. You may be feeling peacefulness in your heart. You can pay attention to that. You may have some aches and pains in your neck or shoulder. You can pay attention to that. Just bringing your attention to wherever your body is calling your attention for a moment. Now bring your attention to your thoughts, just noticing what kinds of thoughts are happening inside you without trying to label them as good or bad, something that you want, you don't want, something that you want to uh, resist, something that you want to suppress, something that you want to indulge in. Just let them be and only see what's happening in your mental sphere, in your psychological sphere. What kinds of thoughts are going? Just noticing them, seeing their flow, their movement. As I'm sure all of you know that the thinking process, this constant movement goes on all the time, even when we are asleep. But we don't generally pay attention to this movement just to study it, to see what's happening there. So take a few moments to just look inward and see what's happening in your mind. See if you can just observe it without doing anything with it. Now I invite you to bring your attention to your heart and similarly see what kinds of feelings are there. Good or bad, happy or sad, it doesn't matter. Whatever feeling that you're experiencing there, just paying attention to that and acknowledging that. A lot of our feelings go unnoticed, but they impact a lot of the activity that we do in our life without even knowing. So just bring your attention to your feelings and see what's happening, just for a few moments. Now take a few deep breaths. And when you are ready, please open your eyes gently and slowly. And thank you for participating in this meditation. So what is meditative inquiry? A lot of you may have come to this conference asking this question. The way I look at meditative inquiry, in one word, if I can summarize meditative inquiry for you, it is this sense of awareness, this deeper sense of awareness to yourself, how you think, feel, and act. A small example of that we just did in our meditation, paying a deeper attention, a sustained, a curious, careful attention to your own self, how you're thinking, how you're feeling, how do you act in the daily lives, but not in isolation, but in relationship to everything else, in relationship to culture, in relationship to other people, in relationship to nature. So meditative inquiry is not a self-enclosed and isolating practice where you separate yourself from the rest of the world. But in fact, by paying deeper attention to yourself in relationship to the life, you develop a deeper understanding of the superficial as well as the deeper movements of life. Excuse me. meditative inquiry has 7 core principles. I've tried to articulate for the first time these 7 core principles in the book that I have just edited and on which this conference is based. The first principle is questioning deeply about everything without fear, because questioning is the door to understanding, including in scientific inquiry and also in the personal meditative inquiry and in social and ecological connection inquiry in the whole life. I think questioning is very central, and questioning not for the sake of questioning, but the questions that are really authentically rooted in your own life. Often I ask students to do an exercise in my class where I encourage them to write their questions without worrying about whether those questions are good or bad, whether those questions are reasonable or unreasonable, but asking questions, even the impossible questions, and living with those questions without fear is a central aspect of meditative inquiry. The second aspect of meditative inquiry, or second principle of meditative inquiry, is this notion of critique. Often we see that people may think that being mindful or meditative is to be non-judgmental, which is very true. But being non-judgmental and being uncritical and complacent are not synonymous. I think a person who is deeply interested in meditation should take upon himself to see how the society imposes its oppression on a lot of people, and oppression is anti-meditative. An oppressed mind and a mind that is oppressive cannot partake in the meditative inquiry process. So critiquing social injustices and oppression is very important. Freedom is the third principle, that we see freedom in the sense of doing whatever I want to do, indulging in whatever I want to do. But from a meditative perspective, freedom implies a sense of psychological freedom, a sense of uh, being outside of the cage of the constant conditioning influences and the outside forces that impress upon ourselves and structure our subjectivities and identities. So it's very important that meditative inquiry cultivates freedom and invites freedom of thinking, of expression, or of just being, which we rarely see in educational spaces. The fourth principle is awareness, which I mentioned to you before, which is central to the notion of meditative inquiry, that is paying attention to yourself in relationship to life, in relationship to other people. Uh, the fifth principle is creativity. That is, meditative inquiry is not supposed to be a kind of a mechanical way of living or an isolated way of living, but it is an invitation to partake in the creative flow of life. And if we see life around us, there is a tremendous explosion of creativity. If you see birds, if you see animals, trees, stars, the whole existence is an explosion of creativity. So meditative inquiry allows you to partake in the flow of the existential creativity. And the sixth principle is relationships and connecting. When we have this sense of awareness, this ongoing sense of daily awareness as an existential process rather than a mechanical practice that we do a particular time of the day, but something that permeates us, that we have imbibed, that meditative inquiry allows us to connect to people, to nature at a very deeper level. So connection and relationship forms the sixth principle of meditative inquiry. And finally, dialogue. Dialogue not to win the argument, dialogue not to suppress the minority voices, but dialogue as something that celebrates our coexistence, our mutual codependence on each other. So dialogue as a way of exploration, of inquiry, and living life in reciprocity, in connections. I will only be very brief on this slide. The meditative inquiry, my work on meditative inquiry have been evolving over a period of time. I have been interested in meditative inquiry from my teenage years when I came across the work of poet Kabir, Indian mystical poet Kabir. But then since then it has continued in one way or the other. It has informed my life. But more formally in the academic setting, I conceptualized the idea of curriculum as meditative inquiry in my doctoral research, where curriculum or education or teaching and learning focused on studying yourself, studying the consciousness of human beings. And because the consciousness of human beings contain the problems of the humanity, but also the solutions. So giving a sustained and careful attention should be part of curriculum and teaching. That's essentially basically I conceptualized in my doctoral dissertation. And when I came to teach at Mount St. Vincent University, I experimented with my ideas, and through that I developed what I call teaching as meditative inquiry approach. The paper, a dialogical paper I published with one of my then students, Adrian Downey, who is now a professor at Mount St. Vincent University. And this paper was widely regarded, including it received an award from Canadian Association for the Advancement of Curriculum Studies. And after that, it occurred to me that it might be a good idea, because so many of my colleagues had expressed interest in the idea of meditative inquiry, that I invite folks, the invitation that I sent to the contributors to this meditative inquiry collection volume, to share their thoughts on meditative inquiry from their own perspective. So if it's an African scholar, from an Afrocentric perspective, if it's an indigenous scholar, from indigenous perspective. So engaging with meditative inquiry from a diverse ways of looking at the world and life, as Anthony also mentioned in his opening remarks, that it opened space for a diversity of perspectives to come in contact with each other and generate an interesting dialogue. Two more concepts that I have developed, which Bonnie mentioned in her introduction to me, so I won't repeat them, is the dialogical meditative inquiry, which is a research methodology to do intersubjective and subjective research, and looks at research and data and participant from a meditative perspective, rather than from a more empirical perspective to collect information, but actually to deeply connect and learn from that. And music as meditative inquiry is my view of not only music, but the creativity in general, how we see creativity as something that should be valued by, or should get accolades and approval from the society, but rather than looking at creativity from an external perspective, looking at creativity as the creative flow of life. And how can we tap into the creative flow of life, which may or may not express itself in a talent or creative art, but which something that allows the creative expression to come out, and so that we can connect with the creative flow of the existence. So this work on meditative inquiry and folks' engagement with that, my colleagues and students' engagement with that, resulted into the meditative inquiry collection. And after that collection, I also designed a course called Education as Meditative Inquiry, which primarily engages students with this idea of meditative inquiry. So this is the book, this is the cover of the book. And as you will see, you can access its the introduction to the book, and the forward, and even Adam's artistic statement. If you go to the Routledge website, and if you preview the book, you will be able to read all that, and it will give you all the information. But essentially, I won't repeat myself, but essentially in this book, I invited a deeper engagement with meditative inquiry from a variety of perspective, African, Asian, Buddhist, indigenous, and from Western colleagues. And also through that, it allowed exploration of a variety of themes, including arts-based research, poetic inquiry, dispute resolution, and legal theorizing, Afrocentricity, among others. After this, this book was done, in fact, through when this book was being prepared, even at that time, I had this idea that we will organize a conference around it. And then it also occurred to me that why not invite additional scholars, in addition to the scholars who have already contributed to the book, to celebrate it even in a bigger way and to create an even larger discussion around the book. So that is the purpose and goals for this conference, which I've already discussed in my welcoming remarks. So I won't read these, but these are here for you to review. Basically, what we want in this conference is for you to learn about meditative inquiry, to develop your own approach to meditative inquiry, because I don't see meditative inquiry as a mechanical approach that I have developed and everybody can, without their own thinking, their own imagination, their own creativity, just implement it mechanically. I'm really against those kinds of practices and approaches which doesn't invite you to create something on your own. That's what I say to my students as well. I'm sharing my work and my insights with you, but ultimately it is up to you to develop your own perspectives and insights. So that would be the goal of the conference, that you learn about meditative inquiry and hopefully find a way to create your own approaches, your own perspectives on it. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. This is the artwork by Adam Garry Podolski, who very kindly and thoughtfully and creatively illustrated this book. The art pieces are very invaluable. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you so much, Adam. So over to you, Bonnie.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashwani. And now, Adam, if you turn on your camera, we'll be able to spotlight you so everyone can see you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to share a bit about my artwork with you on this Tuesday morning. And I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent. And I'm kind of glad that Ashwani showed that first illustration of the July lily, or the tiger lily that I illustrated, because I do believe that meditative inquiry involves sort of a blossoming and opening up to putting our whole selves into our curriculum and our research and teaching. And that's partly what I was trying to illustrate in that particular piece. I can share a few of my drawings with you that were the product of engaging in meditative inquiry. So I think I'll start by sharing my screen now so I can show you some of the illustrations. Let's see. So the first illustration I'd like to share with you is this piece. And so when we started our collaboration together, it was during the pandemic lockdown. And where I was searching for inspiration was actually like my garden and my lawn. And I have a little half-acre of property back there. And in particular, I would like to chat about this subject because it was the earwig, which I think we kind of take this narrow notion of earwigs being a sort of pest in the garden. Maybe something similar is thought of dandelions at the same time. And I thought to myself, like, what is my interaction or connection with these creatures? Like, I'd be kind of like pulling out dandelions or running them over with my lawnmower. And I grew to have an appreciation for these incredibly, resilient creatures that I was interacting with daily or weekly. And in the image, I'm trying to show the sort of majesty of the dandelion, and you can kind of see the moonlight reflecting off the earwig. And to me, after engaging in the practice, they became sort of astonishingly beautiful in a particular way. And so, by developing a dialogical relationship with, like, the lines and curves and graceful forms of the dandelion, I began to appreciate these beautiful masterpieces of nature that I kind of look over every day, or I kind of took it more of a categorical way of thinking about them, and kind of like dissolve that category and focus more on the beauty of relating to these small creatures in my life. I could go on. I think the next, well, maybe I'll just go and talk about whatever one pops up here. The next one I'd like to share with you is this piece. So these are actually two moths that were on the side of my house. And when I was drawing representationally from nature, but I was also trying to draw the insights from Ashwani's reflections on meditative inquiry as well. And the notion that I was looking at here was actually the notion of togetherness. We have these two unique and, irreducibly unique forms, but here they are together, and not necessarily, like, there seem to be sharing a moment together, just being with one another. And I think that's, for me, an important aspect of meditative inquiry is being with one another, rather than critiquing or correcting, but being with, like, listening, observing, and being with one another. Let's see here. This particular image is very special to me. The reflection from Ashwani's writing. I'll read that reflection now, if that's all right. It says, "Your whole being is alive when you are aware. It's not a matter of seeking proof. Your whole being is the proof. It is not your awareness or mine. It's simply awareness." And a friend of mine had recently gifted me like a dream catcher. His name was Ruth Canal, and told me that the story behind it. And they said that there was a young person who was having night terrors. So there's osier dogwood, which is a type of wood. It was bent into a circle, and the lady engaged in dialogue with the spider that said, go and tie that circle of dogwood and put it above your child's bed. And then that night, the spider wove together its web, and that became the dream catcher. And if we look in the bead inside the dream catcher, that's symbolic of the spider. But in terms of the quote, simply awareness, I was really thinking about the idea of dreaming, and how when I'm dreaming, if I'm dreaming about, being on the moon or on a lake, like, I'm really there. And, like, those experiences, I can think about them and reflect on them, and they're part of my awareness, and I can pull ideas and lessons and information from that experience, from that from the awareness of that dream material or dream experience. And so there's actually like a poem too that came to mind while I was drawing this image, and it's by Tyler Coleridge. And this is the poem. What if you slept? And what if in your dream you dreamed? And what if in your dream you went to heaven and there plucked a strange and beautiful flower? And what if when you awoke you had that flower in your hand? Ah, what then? But all these experiences we can pull from being alive. And I think there's lessons in rational thinking. There's lessons in critical thinking. There's lessons in the meditative mindset that Adrian Downey was mentioning, and there's lessons that nature offers us as well. Ashwani, would you like to add anything about our collaboration? Or I was very proud of the process, and it was like a wonderful experience for me.
Yeah, well, definitely I can share a quick thought, Adam. So the way Adam and I met was I was invited to contribute a chapter that Adam was editing, the book that Adam was editing with John Guiney Yallop and Carmen Shields. And through that we met, and Adam was just sharing my chapter with me and edits on it, and he shared one of his artwork with me. And at that time I said, hey, do you want to illustrate the book? This is a very interesting book. A lot of people are contributing to it. And he did that. And the way it evolved was that we had a lot of dialogues about what is possible. Like, I never dictated my intentions on what you should do, but through the dialogue and collaborative process, the artwork came into existence, and it was so wonderful. So each artwork contained one of my thoughts on meditative inquiry that Adam picked, and then he played with it and connected it to his artwork in very beautiful and amazing way. So thank you so much, Adam, for really taking the time and doing it. It's so wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this like incredible and profound project, Ashwani. And it was a joy too seeing the images in the book, because I do think they offer like a meditative pause before beginning the chapter there. They create like a little meditative space in my view, in my mind,
Absolutely,
when reading
absolutely.
the book. Um,
And I'm glad that the audience could also hear your thought process about it, how you went about it, because I think it makes much more sense for them to see the purpose behind those artistic work. And Adam also has a very well written artistic statement in the book that also sheds light on how his arts came into being.
hmm And I suppose, like I might mention, in terms of my dissertation, it was focused on how social intercourse would bring new ways of being into the world. And I really related to Ashwani's notion of dialogue as bringing about a way of being and living. Because I think from time immemorial, like our parents and their parents have been engaging in a form of intercourse and dialogue through war, starvation, famine, and death, like back through even ancestral species. And I just think like the odds of actually being here and being able to experience life, I think is incredible. And I think it's just such a, I think it might have been a biologist said it would be such a callous insult to all those people who were never born not to find gratitude in this life and not to share in our experiences, like our experience, our biographic experiences, way of being and knowing with one another, to make the world more rich and exciting. And in that way, I think meditative inquiry taps into the big adventure that's life.
Wow, thank you so much for both of your comments, Adam and Ashwani. I particularly appreciate hearing you speak directly on your work, Adam, honestly, your creative process. That was marvelous. In case everyone hasn't realized this, the chat is now open for people to ask questions. So please feel free to ask questions to engage Ashwani and Adam further in their presentation. Everyone, yes, it's open.
So you can, if you wish, Bonnie, you can feel free to read out some of the comments. I just saw one very nice comment from Anuradha Ajit. Can you see that, Adam?
No,
it's for
I
you.
can't.
Can you see, Adam? Because for some reason, oh, maybe it was direct. It was a direct message to me. So I will just send it to everybody.
Yeah, and I see that Caroline just messaged like, I love the dandelion inclusion, called a weed, but every part of the plant is blessing, food, medicine, etc. Like for the dandelion too, I think like many people might know there's bee purple, like a bee sees further into the ultraviolet range than us, but a dandelion, we see it as yellow, but there's a little landing pad in bee purple for the bee to help it pollinate the flower. And, there's such an important part of food production and like really like us being able to sustain our livelihood. We're closely connected to the bee. And in terms of even, I was thinking about this when I was engaging in meditative inquiry and the creative process. Like I started, it was in winter, but I was thinking I could see my breath because I've lived in Northern Ontario, but we are in a way kind of unforgivingly connected to our environment. When we breathe, we're connected to our setting. Without that setting, we without the food to energize our body and the air to allow us to live our life, we need the setting, the things around us to survive. We dramatically depend on each other. you know? And that was an important connection that I thought about when I was creating these images, my connection with these different creatures.
There's a question here that I think it could actually be addressed to both of you, although it's directed towards Ashwani, which is what's the difference between meditative inquiry and contemplative inquiry or contemplative pedagogy? And you could actually direct that towards the artistic process as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I think they definitely share a lot of connections with each other. I think the focus being the study of yourself and learning about yourself. Again, this is my perspective, so this is not the only perspective. I think that we should keep in mind. I see that through the mindfulness movement and the contemplative movement, now in its origin, it is rooted in the Buddhist philosophy and the worldview. But I saw that in its modern iteration, it seems to be connected. It became more about collecting evidence of meditation, whether meditation works or not, and also so it became like more scientific in its orientation and became more focused on the technique part of it or the strategies part of it, which I find a little bit problematic. So in its origin and root, of course, it is rooted in the Buddhist and philosophy, where the focus is learning about yourself, finding out the truth, understanding the cause of the suffering and ending suffering, and attaining a sense of compassion for oneself and for the every being. But sometimes I see that in its modern iteration, it can be limited to techniques and strategies rather than being connected to the larger purpose of spiritual inquiry. Daphne has a question. Daphne, do you mind sharing your question in the chat?
And I also wonder, Adam, if there's a difference for you in the process, a contemplative process compared to Ashwani's meditative inquiry process.
It made a difference to me because my background was actually in narrative inquiry. So in a way that the inquiry process, the meditative aspect and contemplative aspect were important because I was trying to capture this feeling. I was trying to, no, not actually, that's the word, that exact word I didn't want to use was capture, because I wasn't trying to capture something. I was trying to express my gratitude for this creative energy I was experiencing through the process of meditative inquiry, through meditation, I should say. But the inquiry aspect, I was thinking of myself as a school teacher, as a curriculum theorist, looking back on who I was as who I was as a teacher, who I was as an educator, who I was as an artist, and bringing all these aspects of who I am into the artwork and expressing them. So for me, they're pretty close, meditation and contemplation, but the process of inquiry, which added, like, for me, an intellectual and academic element based on my doctoral studies, was an important part of engaging in the process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I don't know if you've noticed this, Ashwani. I mean, you both actually made reference to Adrian Downey earlier,
yeah.
But Adrian has a comment. I'll just read it out loud in case anyone can't read it. Ashwani, you've spoken about the importance of social critique within meditative inquiry. And I think Krishnamurti might say something to the effect that social change emerges from change of the self. If you are not free at the beginning, you won't be free at the end, etc. I'm wondering how you might respond to Eve Tuck's critique of this idea that it isn't a terribly effective theory of systematic change and that it ultimately relies on the empathy of people in power.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you, Adrian, for your wonderful question. And often people have raised this question to me, especially when I was doing my doctoral research. So in my doctoral research, I have responded to this question as effectively as I could. And this question was also put to Krishnamurti a lot, who forms the basis of my understanding in many ways. So basically, the way I see it, a lot of people think my understanding it, that when people become interested in spirituality, and this point I raised with you, Bonnie, in the dialogue as well, that often it may turn into navel gazing, or just for your own enlightenment or for your own nirvana, right? So they lose sight of the social fabric they are part of, or the social structure they are part of, and not being critical of the oppressions and the injustices in the society. So as I have been working on this concept and practice of meditative inquiry, it became very clear to me that critique should be central to meditative inquiry. Now, critique not just for the sake of critiquing, critique not for the sake of critiquing, because if I critique, I feel that I'm better than other people, or I know than other people, but critique that is essentially rooted in the compassion. So when Buddha critiques desire, the Buddhist principle and many other religious philosophies are based on pointing to the people the danger of the desire and that it brings suffering. But when Buddha is critiquing desire, or exposing its complicated nature and how it affects us and everybody, or when Krishnamurti is talking about desire, they are not critiquing it in the sense of saying you have desire and you are a bad person. They're not doing that. They are saying when you study desire, you see how desire impact your life and how desire affect the life of everybody else. So if it is me-centered, my-centered, and more for me, we see so many problems that we see in the world, the problem of racism, the problem of war, the problem of exploitation, it's rooted in my group, more for my group, and my group is better than your group. It's essentially rooted in this self-centered desire of feeling secure, feeling better than others, having more than others. So that's one part. Critique to me is central to it, Adrian. The other part that you are saying, I think, is, will a study of yourself lead to systemic change, to the external change? My answer to that question is that we are not separate from the system. I am not separate from the system, not just conceptually, but existentially. My thinking, my feelings, they're all shaped by external forces, conditioning influences. A lot of the time, like Gurdjieff, a Russian philosopher, used to call human beings a machine, a complete mechanical response to the external structures. If the iPhones are popular, everybody is buying iPhone. Just one example. That's why advertising agencies bombard us with so much, because it seeps us at deeper level, and obviously everybody is trying to get things in the fashion of an automaton, right? So we are part of the system. We sustain structures, we sustain systemic. So when people say systemic racism or structural inequities, we are part of that. We are carrying them over through our actions, through our feelings. We continue to sustain and deepen those problems and structures. So it's very important to change the structures, to change the policies. I was just reading a book on the African American history, and it was just mind-boggling how the people were tortured, controlled, exploited in such a bad way, right? The civil rights movements began, and a lot of gains were made. But if you see, we're still talking about it. Why are we still talking about it? Because the mindset hasn't changed. It is only changing superficially. So now, for many of us, it is being on the right hand side of the history. So anti-racism is good, critiquing the social inequities is good, but have our hearts changed at a very deeper level? If they really have, why do the racism still exist? So a systemic change can only do so much. So am I saying that the systemic change is not important? No, it is very important. But we do need to realize that until there is a deeper change, like Krishnamurti used to call mutation in the brain, unless the brain has the capacity to change and change really radically, the external problems will continue. And our educational system, our social system, unfortunately doesn't create the space in which we study ourselves and see those deeper issues and problems, because we are part and parcel of the structural problems. We are not independent of them. So when somebody says, I want to change the system, I think the right way probably should be to say, I want to change our consciousness, because that will immediately change the system. Because a system doesn't have its own life. It gets life, it sucks blood out of us. It lives on our blood. It is ourselves. So I hope that responded to some extent, Adrian, your question.
I think that answered it very thoroughly. I'm not sure if you want to comment on that, Adam. I know it wasn't directly directed towards you, but were you inspired to speak on anything then?
Well, that's part of the reason I thought that Ashwani's work is so important, because as a teacher, I live the curriculum, and I'm in the school. I live in the school system, and my thoughts, and my agency, and my creativity, and my conversations are part of creating that system. And so when I'm working with my principals or having conversations with the superintendents, we're trying to make a space where there's growth, fun, freedom, joy, all those things are part of the lived system too. And say if you have a critical pedagogue and they consider they have something authoritative to say about the education that I'm living, but they're not part of that lived experience, I think there's a level of dissonance between the critique and what I'm living. But with meditative inquiry, it's about listening and engaging in dialogue and creating something uniquely new within that space, conceiving of a new way of being and living and sharing together. And that's what I value about Ashwani's approach, and about illustrating and expressing art to communicate those ideas through the visual language of art. I wanted to do it for that reason, the reasons that Ashwani mentioned and articulated in his answer to Adrian.
Marvelous. Thank you both so much. Okay, there's another question here. This is from Krista Ritchie. And it's really more directed to you both. It's quite a different topic. Can you speak to how you handle moments when you embrace awareness of thoughts and interests, and then fully recognize how much is going on, how much there is to learn and inquire about?
This is a great question. And, I've been looking at so many questions. So everyone, we really apologize if we can't get to all the questions. But as I often say in my classes, the very fact that we are raising the question for our inquiry, it begins the inquiry. It starts the inquiry. So please don't mind if we really not able to respond to all the questions. But to Krista's question, I hope I'm understanding it all right. But the way I look at it, there is so much to learn about and so much to understand. But if we see it in terms of like a measurable quantity, or if we see it in terms of, like in many religions, there is a concept that if you do this and this and this, then finally you will get that and that. You will get at that particular state. I really don't look at meditative exploration or meditative inquiry in such a way. So I wouldn't put a limit on it. Every moment is a moment of learning, and learning not in the sense of Krishnamurti has talked a lot about it. Learning not in the sense of accumulating information about yourself and about how you are acting and interacting in the daily life, but learning as a way of deepening your awareness of your connection with yourself and with everybody. So awareness and learning is happening all the time. And Krishnamurti have often used a phrase called choiceless awareness. It's a beautiful phrase and often misunderstood. So when one is aware without a desire or a goal, that if I become aware, I will get rid of my fears. If I become aware, I will get rid of my stress. When there is no goal, when there is no instrumental purposiveness associated with it, then every moment is a moment of awareness, and every moment is a moment of learning. Actually, the learning, it's exploding all the time. The deeper the attention, the deeper the sense of awareness, the deeper the learning of the moment and your response to it. So through that learning, the response that we have is also non-accumulative and non-mechanical. I don't know how much can I talk about, but I'll just limit at that. Thank you so much, Krista. We are so close. In our offices are just next to each other. We can of course talk about it again. Thank you.
Do you have any comments on that, Adam? You know, when you leave yourself open to everything, if it's what you do with it when it all arrives, when you become truly aware of everything there is.
I think for me, like I'm like I said, I like it gives me a feeling of gratitude, and I think it's just a beautiful feeling to be able to be alive and engage in understanding what other people have to say and listening to what they have to say. And I'll say like in educational practice in terms of this is more specific, but I'm a student success teacher in a secondary school, and sometimes we engage in situations that it can be pretty extreme, but it's so important to, rather than reacting, listen and try to understand what's happening in the room. You might have, I'll give you an example, and it might kind of seem strange at first. You might have a student show up at maybe 9 o'clock in the morning wearing like a bathing suit, and you might say, why is this happening? But the case might be that her biological parent just bought her. That was the last thing that she bought her. Now her foster parents might not think she's safe at home. And at first, what seems not comprehensible, there's a story and a history behind it. And by listening and by being aware of what that person has shared with you, you can understand these situations. And they're not something to say, oh, this isn't dress code. What, but rather than judging or trying to correct, we can listen and understand. And that's part of the value of engaging in meditative inquiry.
Okay, thank you.
There is an idea of invisible backpack, right? I don't know who coined the term, but that we often only see a very superficial engagement, but we may not know where is it coming from. There are so many things we are all carrying with each other. I saw a comment from Daphne, and definitely it's an uncomfortable practice. So I appreciate that you're experiencing that in your classroom through the work that you are doing with your students. Definitely, it can be uncomfortable, but I have seen if the students see your genuine interest in something that you're doing, they definitely begin to appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, we do have just a couple of minutes left before we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back at 10:30. So maybe this could be, this won't take long to answer. This was attached to Adrian's. I'm wondering if I could ask an extended question that I think relates to his question. Can meditative inquiry be combined with a framework like culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy to be focused and deliberate about where our systems and institutions have to meet us?
That's a question by Martin Morrison, who is also a speaker later today. Thank you so much, Martin, for your question. Yeah, I definitely think so. What I have observed, that how the dominance of Eurocentric thinking after colonization have marginalized cultures, and the more the ways the cultures have emerged from the earth. Like when you see the work of indigenous people, indigenous scholars, that the cultures have come from our interaction with earth, the ancient culture, which are still, despite all the Eurocentric domination, they still exist, and they are still being carried forward by the conscientious people, those who really care about culture. So the one thing that I wanted to emphasize, that learning from ancient cultures and ancient perspectives, practices and perspectives with an open mind is very, very important. because even meditative inquiry, it's not something new. If you see in the very beginning of the book, I talk about the song of creation from Rig Veda, where where they were contemplating upon existential questions for a very long time, and it existed in all the cultures and all in all the people to know who we are, how we are. So I think we really need to not discard cultural practices and cultural perspectives on the surface of it. That to me is central to meditative inquiry too, to learn from. And I have recently talked about it. I've briefly mentioned about it in this book, but I've also co-authored a paper with some of my students where I've talked about why it is important to connect with cultures and cultural practices like yoga. Yoga is not just a modern movement to be slim. Yoga is a deeply rooted spiritual and cultural practice. Qigong, I've gotten recently very interested in Qigong, and I've learned how deep these exercises are. They're not just exercises, they're spiritual practices to connect with yourself. So culture should be a central part is a central part of meditative inquiry. And I definitely think that meditative inquiry can support culturally responsive pedagogy, because culturally responsive pedagogy, in my view, means that accepting the culture, bringing the culture into your classroom and learning from the culture and letting the culture inform your pedagogy. And meditative inquiry, given its focus on awareness, openness, conversation, freedom, can definitely give a lot of support and work collaboratively with the culturally responsive pedagogy. Thank you, Martin. I hope that responds to some extent.
Okay, thank you so much, Ashwani, and thank you very much, Adam Podolski, for sharing all of your reflections on your illustrations. And also, it was very interesting to hear you both discuss the ideas. So for everyone that's here, what's going to happen now is we're going to take a 10-minute break and return at 10:30. So it's time to move around, visit any facilities you need to, and be back at 10:30 for our first keynote panel, the contributions of meditative inquiry to the field of education. Thank you very much.